denn unser erstes Panel des Tages geht um die Strategie für Europa. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass Nora Sophie Griefahn das Ganze leitet. Schön, dass du da bist und herzlich willkommen zu diesem Tag. Ich hoffe, du hast einigermaßen genug geschlafen. Ich weiß, es war ein harter, langer Tag gestern und wir freuen uns umso mehr, dass das Programm heute auch wieder so voll und so bunt ist. Und schön, dass du es startest.
Ja, vielen Dank, Nina, für die tolle Anmoderation und auch generell für die tolle Tagesmoderation. I will switch to English now because the next panel will be in English. So if anyone has a problem with this, please just go back there. There is a possibility to get translation on the ear as well. Thank you so much for all of you that, we are here again. We had I think we had a really great day yesterday already, and we talked about a lot of different perspectives on Cradle to Cradle, especially with a focus on Germany, but also with a focus on what different companies, different sectors can do, how to implement these ideas. So we also talked about how education is one of the main points as well, and also that culture is so important for talking about how we can actually change our thinking. Today we have a bit a different focus. In this session we will talk about how the European Union and how Europe is going on with these topics on Cradle to Cradle. And we just hear that we have a big commitment from the European Commission for Cradle to Cradle. And I think this is one thing that we can already be quite happy about and give a big applause to this as well. And that's why it's so cool that we have a lot of people from the European Union here as well, and also from the European Parliament and from the European Commission. And I'm really happy to ask you to come up here on stage with me. Anna Cavazzini, she is a member of the European Parliament here from Germany, and she can probably also give us a good perspective on how this is actually what we are talking about, how this is different from talking from the European perspective to talking what is actually happening here in Germany. She's also part from in the Committee on the International Market and Consumer Protection, and probably this is also something that is really fitting well. Please come here on stage. Thank you that you're here. Then we have one person who is really engaged in their circular economy action plan and in what we just heard, and is actually working on the ground with these topics every day. Ciobanu-Dordea, the director of the circular economy in the Directorate General Environment from the EU Commission. Hey. Thank you so much that you're here with us today. He has been the director for the circular economy at the European Commission, Director General for the Environmental since May 22. So, he can give us some insights about the work at the Commission. And he has also worked for the European Commission from 2009 already. So, you're probably quite into what has already happened the last 10 years. We already did this work we are doing here as well. So thank you so much that you're here. And then the third panelist who's joining me on stage is Grainger-Jones. He is the executive director of the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, who is actually the organization who is giving the cradle-to-cradle certification. So sometimes you have probably seen it, it's a label that you can find on products which defines what or shows what a cradle-to-cradle product could be. Alvin joined the Institute just recently, but he was leading in a lot of different positions for the last years. So he has spent several years at the consultative group of international agriculture research. He was at the UN International Fund for Agriculture and at the World Bank. So he had already quite a lot of stations. Thank you that you're here as well.
Go after the water bottle.
So, and also, of course, we want to discuss with you. So, like Nina mentioned, please use the Slido tool, and I will try to get your questions in here during the discussion as well. I think we have heard a lot also from Mr. Sinchevicius, and he just explained that we have a really important role, that Cradle-to-Cradle plays an important role in the work that the European Commission is doing. How are you actually looking at this? What is already happening with the European Action Plan, Aurel? How is your impression of how the member states of the European Union are actually implementing these ideas, or is it just an idea that we can see for the future?
Good morning. Thanks a lot for having me in this morning session. And it's a pleasure to be here and to see that the concerns for circularity are shared by so many people across the European Union, also in Berlin. And Germany, of course, is an important political player in this drive for circularity. So you asked a question about how I would see the bilan, how I would assess what we have done so far. Well, we are right now still delivering the second Circular Economy Action Plan. Some 7-8 years ago, there was the first one. And at the beginning of the mandate of the current European Commission, actually in 2020, a second Circular Economy Action Plan was adopted. I think we have been focused a lot on regulatory approaches and on standard setting, and we have delivered quite a lot of far-reaching proposals. In particular, the second generation of the Circular Economy Action Plan was marked by a shift in our understanding of the things, or witnesses a deeper understanding of what we need to do in order to advance circularity in the interest of our economies and societies. And the need is to focus on life cycle approaches and inevitably to focus on the design of products. And we have delivered a number of important legislative proposals on batteries, for instance. It's the first expression of this life cycle approach. Then my political boss, Commissioner Sinchevicius, mentioned the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, which is a holistic framework for the sustainability of products. On packaging, we have made similar proposals, and there are a few others on automotive, circularity in the automotive sector. Right before the summer break in July, we have made a proposal to the Parliament and to the Council. But we need to make sure we have focused a lot on the regulatory dimension. I think implementation and results are still yet to be delivered. There are important changes which have occurred, but if we look, for instance, at the mirror, which is represented by a set of reports also adopted by the Commission in June this year, focusing only on waste management, which is a tiny part, or limited part, not tiny maybe, but limited part of circularity, we see that the performance across the European Union under a number of key obligations is quite modest, and actually 2/3 of the member states are lagging behind when it comes to a number of obligations which they should have met already in 2020 and which are even more ambitious for 2025. And we are just 1 year and a half before, or 1 year and a half before 2025, and we are not yet there. So this means that in the future, getting to results will be very important. It will be very important because the reality lags behind the ambitions and the vision. And it will also be very important because the pieces of legislation that I have mentioned, eco-design, batteries, packaging, and many others, are actually framework legislation which still need to deliver, under which we still need to deliver a number of regulatory measures which will be crucial. To give you just a few examples, the first measure we will have to deliver on eco-design under the regulation will be the sustainability criteria for textiles. This will set the level playing field not only within the European Union but at global level, because the importance of the European market for the trade in textiles globally, and because the way in which we interact with third jurisdictions. And we work with our American friends or with our Japanese friends, they follow what we are doing. Plastics is another candidate for sustainability criteria under eco-design. The sustainability of packaging and the recycling at scale under the packaging regulation will be very important as well. And there are a number of few other measures. So to conclude, maybe after a little bit of a long introduction, I apologize, I would say a lot has been delivered as vision and as regulatory ambition, but we need to continue to work now to deliver in practice.
Thank you very much. I mean, so you were also talking about what needs to be delivered, and we also hear that the European Commission was criticizing the member states for not implementing design principles fast enough, or starting with it, but only looking on the perspective of waste management. Do you think all the states are actually at this stage right now, or do you see differences? What do you think? How can we actually get together to get this on the road?
Yeah, I will be much shorter, although arguably your second question is much more complex than the first one. So I already mentioned that in June this year we have published a mirror in which we can look and see how tall we are, how slim we are, how beautiful we are, and how young we are. And we don't look so well already. We know this, and I think there is a lot of work which needs to be done, and this brings me to the idea of strengthening the partnership between the European Union and the member states. The European Union is only a political concept and a notion which is intellectual in the absence of a substantive connection with the member states and with the citizens and with our communities. So if we do not work every day in order to strengthen this relationship, we will not be able to deliver. And this is also true in the area of circularity. where the competencies of the Union are limited. There is no magic in itself which can be done just in Brussels, ivory tower or not. A lot of power lies with the member states, and not only in the capitals, in the local municipalities, in the smaller municipalities, not only where waste is collected, but where consumption takes place, where a lot of things happen. And these things must happen at the same time everywhere across the European Union. It's not just a political discourse in the rarefied airs in the rooms in Brussels. It must happen on the ground if we want reality to change. And the second comment is about what you said in your introduction. Education and convergence, and if we really want to move to the cradle-to-cradle concept, we cannot rely only on regulation. Regulation will deliver some certain things, and it is indispensable. We cannot just act with goodwill and things like this, but education is very important. And if we, for instance, think about one example of circularity, moving to the economy of services and servitization, instead of buying all the time new products, using services from manufacturers for fridges, for washing machines, etc., and you know better like this. The psychological conditions across the European Union are not uniform. It's not only about the difference in performance between member states, it's about the different perceptions. Because of the different historical backgrounds we are coming, and also different levels of economic development, which we must admit also bring differences in understanding of certain challenges. And we need to do more, for instance, in member states where the sense of ownership and of property rights is perceived differently, like in compared to Germany or to Belgium or to Netherlands, where people in the 21st century let go this sense of close ownership of the goods and are happy to use goods more as services. We need to work and to explain and to educate, and also to explain what is beyond this, why we are moving to this, what higher objectives and what needs we are serving by doing so.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting that you mentioned to bring these ideas together, because actually in our perspective, a lot of times we think that circular economy and also what is happening with the Circular Economy Action Plan is not always combining these different sectors that actually all belong together, and they should all be looked at in a perspective of circularity and cradle to cradle. What I mean is, for example, the agriculture sector. It's not part of the Circular Economy Action Plan, and in our perspective, we would say this is something we would also need to have a look at with the same perspective. Or also, if you talk about education, we should always have this in mind as well and put it as one of the pillars in there as well. Also talking about nutrient circulation and nutrient management. We are not having these perspectives in the Circular Economy Action Plan. We always talk about an industry strategy, but that we actually need to change our culture. That was something we were talking about yesterday as well. Would be something we would actually see a lot in this work as well.
Consumption patterns as well,
Anna, you actually, you can see both sides. You're member of the European Parliament, and you're also from Germany and member of the Green Party. The Green Party is the environmental ministry is held by your party, and also the national circular economy strategy is made up there right now. How would you, if you see these different perspectives and you see what is actually happening from the European Commission, are you sometimes a bit mad that it's like so slowly going in Germany when you actually see that you're already making up so good plans in the European level?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and discuss also the European and international dimension of circular economy and cradle to cradle. And congratulations for this excellent Congress. So I'm, of course, a true European. That's why I'm in the European Parliament. And in principle, I think it is very, very good that we act on the European level, because, you know, if all the national governments just do whatever they want, then we have a big contradiction, and we have a fragmentation of the EU market. We have different rules for different companies. So in principle, I think it's good that we have this umbrella framework regulations on EU level. But of course, we also see if some member states go ahead, like for example, the French government is actually really, really far ahead in circular economy policies. They have a repair index. They have basically implemented already the right to repair. They have other very, very interesting measures. Then this also gives some like, I don't know, some impulse for the European level. So there's always a little bit an interaction between national regulation and then EU regulation. In the best sense, I would say. I think the German government, for example, is also really committed to the right to repair. This is one of the topics I'm working on, because I think it has a huge potential. You know, it involves the people, it involves an educational aspect. If people can bring their phone or their whatever water kettle to the repair shop and you know, think about the question, why do we always throw away things? How can we make products live longer? But the German government, rightly so, is not proposing a right to repair, because it is coming from European level. And I think it's, you know, it's good to always have an idea of what is being discussed at European level and probably complement and make sure that the two levels have a really good interaction with each other. And having said this, probably on a more broader level, we are discussing the question of regulation versus probably other important principles, like also funding, like education. I'm also, at the end, a big fan of regulation. I mean, that's why I'm in the parliament. But I'm traveling so much in Germany, meeting so many companies. I understand also a lot of them are here in the room who want to implement circular economy, but to tell me, okay, the regulatory framework is not made to favor like recycled products in a new content, or who say, yeah, we are really in a disadvantage compared to conventional businesses, so we want regulation. And that's why I think having this strong European rules on some aspects are really, really important. I find it sometimes interesting that a circular economy is a concept that is often shared by everyone in a way. So you can get the impression that there is not really political opposition. But I can also tell you from the European Parliament, it's not as easy, and I don't say you are technocratic, but you know, not as, okay, there's like a rule on sustainable products and then everyone in the European Parliament is happy. It's also still political battles to get some of the regulation through. And if you want, I can probably mention later a little bit what are the political battles. Concluding, I want to say we need regulation, we need people who are fighting on the ground, like progressive companies who say we want regulation, civil society actors, to make a very, very good framework happen, to make circular economy really happen.
Thank you. I think there were a lot of things that we can actually... that we can also reconnect later on as well, like you said. Maybe I just hand over to Alvin to get you into the discussion as well. Maybe just because I'm not sure that everyone is actually knows what you are doing with the Institute. Can you maybe just give us a brief introduction what your Institute is actually doing? And yeah.
Thanks. Look, thanks so much for the invitation here. Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. It was co-founded by Michael Braungart and Bill McDonough, who wrote that wonderful book. It was set up some time ago. It's a non-profit that has a global standard that's entirely based on the design principles of Cradle to Cradle. We have about 500 companies, brave companies, that have gone through a really rigorous standard, a certification process with third-party assessment, hundreds of documents, really detailed material health assessment, and as an incentive to go through that process and to demonstrate that this is not just firm claims, it's actual reality, there's a certificate at the end of that. But it's really a corporate change process that takes at least a year, if not longer. And so that's why, for us, if I could digress a moment, based on what Aurel and Anna were saying, the signaling of the European regulatory evolution here is just so powerful, right? We have a number of companies coming to us saying, we want to get ahead of this regulatory development. It's no coincidence that despite actually being founded originally in the US, 70% of our business is actually in Europe now. So it's actually driving real demand. The challenge is that 70% is still 70% of a small number of certificates in the grand scale of things. So what you were saying about national implementation of this amazing regulatory framework, which seems to just reflect so well that the concepts that's being discussed here today is what's going to make the difference for us between 500 plus really well-intended, often big companies and hundreds of thousands, right? And that's the step now. It's the strength of that signaling, and it's the credibility of the signaling. If the market signaling diminishes, I think we're going to see companies questioning whether the market incentives are enough for them to go through this really difficult change process. And who likes change, right? So.
By talking about these different rules, we as an organization are more the ones who are actually talking about the framework of Cradle to Cradle, the school of thought and what's behind. And that's why we're also talking about agriculture, for example. That's also not quite a part of the certification and not of the action plan, but you can see that there's a lot of different people involved in changing our systems. What is your role in helping companies to implement Cradle to Cradle?
We, as an institute, we set the standard. We have a relatively new standard called version 4, which we're actually updating now. And that sets, it's a very detailed, thick document of all the things that need to be done to meet this standard in different levels. So that's our primary role. That actually, yes, it doesn't include agriculture, but includes soil and water, which are often, in terms of the relationship between manufacturing and agriculture, are often the drivers, or one of the drivers of soil degradation and water degradation, water use degradation. So we set the standard. The second thing we do is we have a number of what we call assessors, or organizations that are experts in change management with companies. And there are 11 of those right now, including APEA. Some of those colleagues are here. And those companies work intensively, those experts work intensively with companies to go through this change process. It includes circularity. It's the only multi-attribute standard. We're the only multi-attribute standard that actually includes circularity in a certificate program, because it can be a somewhat ephemeral concept, somewhat unclear for some. So we try and make it very practical and have very specific numeric targets about many different aspects of circularity at the company level. So these assessors go deep into these companies. There's site visits, there's chemical composition analysis to the nth degree in terms of the product safety, the material health. And then they submit to us an application for a certification to say this company meets this standard at different levels. And then we review that, and we have quite a few rounds of discussion. We need to see more and more documents. It's a very heavy process. It's a little niche. We'd like to see more companies do it, but not by lowering the ambition. And that, getting back to a regulatory sort of driver of demand, because the market is not doing it sufficiently yet, doing it in parts. So that's what we do. We issue the certificates and we set the standard, all based on the concepts of cradle to cradle. And if I might just add, that's why we think it's brilliant that there are meetings like this. If only we had the same in the US, in China, in India, in many other countries, and perhaps this could be the beginning of something, because we need that proliferation of this thinking. In a sense, this needs to be a movement, not a series of organizations, and that's why it's just great to see what you're doing here.
Thank you very much. By hearing this, how would the European Commission look at these different standards? Because there are a lot of labels out there, and also on the other hand we have the perspective of regulation. How is these implemented in your ideas and in your work with the Circular Economy Action Plan?
Well, I was nodding when I was listening to Elwin, because I had the impression that we share the same perception about what is really the real next frontier in this drive towards circularity. And the next frontier, we believe, is the mainstreaming of practices, of sustainable practices, sustainable business models. We have seen over the past decade or even more the development of such business models and practices, but we don't see yet their generalization. So the question is, how do you generalize them? Through regulatory tools, of course, through this life cycle approach that we have embraced over the past few years. This is one driver, but it's not enough. Through education, this is also very important, because the education of consumer citizens and the consumer must become citizen or re-emerge as a citizen and understand the challenges of his or her time when embracing circularity, but this is yet not enough. So there are also some nudging. You have mentioned nudging, and how do you entice change as well? And I was reflecting, and certainly not the only one reflecting, reading, I think it's in The Economist of this week. They have an article about heat pumps and the generalization of heat pumps as a sustainable solution for decarbonizing the heating of our dwellings in Europe, and not only. And how important it is to convince people rather than mandate. So there is a nuance here. Sometimes you have to mandate, but sometimes you cannot do. And when the costs are really significant, how do we entice? And I've been recently in contact with a large European group who has suggested, why don't you stimulate through fiscal incentives, for instance, the transition towards more business models, instead of obliging everybody to recycle, I don't know what, bicycles or something, or different sports equipment, or why don't you propose reduced VAT rates or other fiscal incentives in order to encourage this. And certainly this is an approach. It's a very difficult one because at the European level you need unanimity, but we have seen such instruments being used in the past, and I think we need to think more about the use of economic instruments. Certainly the VAT rates are not the only ones. There are economic instruments in the area of circular economy. Extended producer responsibility can be used even more systematically by us, and maybe fine-tuning things, and we have learned over the past 15 to 20 years, since EPR rules have been introduced in the Waste Framework Directive, until now, when we have come with new EPR rules for the textile sector and for the management of textile waste before the summer break, we have understood that we need to go more in detail, and probably one step further will be even necessary, even if the level of fees should be adopted at in the member states only, and not at European level, as some have suggested. So,
thank you. There are a lot of questions from the audience as well, and I think one that is also voted quite high fits really good with what you just said, that there are also political challenges with your colleagues at the Parliament, and there was the question how difficult it is to push through circular economy against other lobbyists in the European Union, probably also against other political perspectives. Yeah, maybe you can say something to this.
I think first there is also the aspect of how do people perceive EU regulation, and then there's a question of lobbying. On the first aspect, I have the feeling also in general, you know, in principle, most EU citizens would be in favor of circular economy. But we have also seen in the past, and I hope it doesn't happen again, but especially the eco-design framework at some point also sparked a lot of opposition, because sometimes people feel, okay, why is the EU regulating my coffee machine? For example, you have this rule that the coffee machine cannot heat for 10 hours, but it has to be switched off, which saves a lot of energy. Or we had the famous light bulb discussion, probably all of you remember. So it's also, I mean, in principle, we always have, I think, positive, very positive connotations from EU citizens when it comes to the general support of circular economy. But then sometimes when it goes also more into detail, we have to make sure that we don't have this discussion, the EU is so bureaucratic and even saying what my light bulb should be or my coffee machine. But at the end, again, I'm a big fan of these kind of rules because it makes sense to start at the design of the products. And I think it has been discussed at this Congress a lot, and not only talk about recycling and waste management, because then it's kind of a little bit too late. So you have to start at the design stage. And this is what we're doing with the eco-design, for example. Secondly, the political discussions and the lobbying. I mean, again, also in this field, I have the feeling most companies are always in principle in favor. But then the more detailed you go into some of the ideas we are having to make the legislation as effective as possible, the more opposition there is. And of course, we have also groups in the European Parliament who just are not in favor of too much regulation. And I was, for example, very, very disappointed when we just voted the construction products regulation. That was a regulation we didn't talk about today yet. But our idea as Greens was also to use the harmonization of construction products, and this is the initial idea of this regulation in the EU market, to also prescribe sustainable construction products, because as we know, it's one of the biggest problems we have when it comes to this throwaway society and not a circular design. And like the conservatives and the liberals just kick this provision out in the parliament position because they say, no, it's too much obligations for the construction sector, we cannot do this. This is just one example to show it's not an automatism that we get good rules, it's always a political fight, but that's why also, you know, congresses like this are so important.
That's probably also way of looking at things, how you want to get maybe to the same goal, but with different perspectives on how you get there. I think you also, I mean, one of these things is also you talked about the right to repair. And in a cradle-to-cradle manner, you would probably rather, than talking about the right to repair, talking about the right to function. So actually, I mean, we don't want to repair a product, but we want that it's just functioning and that somebody who sells us something is actually also being aware that it's functioning and that it's not needed to be repaired. So how is these kind of perspective change something that is also part in your discussions as well?
No, in principle, I mean, I like the framing, but I would say in principle it's absolutely the same, because the right to repair has two aspects. It's connected to the eco-design, so basically the idea is to make all products repairable and to design them in a way that they don't have weird screws that no one has the screwdriver for, or that everything is glued, but to make sure products are designed in a way that you can repair them and to make them functionable again. And
but it's different if I repair it myself or if I just know that it will function. That's something different.
And the obsolescence rules.
Yeah.
I think this should also be in the
I think it's the same. I don't understand the difference, to be very honest, because like if my product lives longer, then it functions. If it breaks and I can repair it, then it also functions, but I don't know. The important part of this right to repair and also other legislations we are working on, that it includes the consumer perspective. For example, we are also now working on legislation that is prohibiting greenwashing to really make sure, okay, a product can just not be called climate neutral anymore if it's not climate neutral, but to make sure that also consumers are basically taken along in the circular economy idea and the right to repair, but other also pieces of legislations are having this important consumer perspective and trying to make the sustainable choice the norm.
There's one question that is probably fitting quite well in this discussion as well, because the question is the risk of tail wagging the dog, like trend, if there's a trend, if you have a lot of regulations and there's a trend that big corporates focus only on reporting instead of putting resources in green innovations. This is something that we hear quite often. Would you say, how is the Commission looking at this? Is it something you're aware of? If you have to do a lot of sustainability reporting now, and you spend like a lot of time in reporting what you're all doing, but you don't spend the time in actually changing what you're doing.
Yeah, it is true that there has been an overdrive and maybe an exaggeration, because different pieces of legislation have been used in order to add different reporting obligations. Taxonomy is also contributing a little bit to this. And I think we will see some simplification in the following period. Also, our president, the president of the European Commission and your compatriot, Mrs. von der Leyen, has made a commitment to reduce the reporting burden. So there is some justification on this. But I would like to use, I mean, it's not related to this question. I would like to use the opportunity to make an additional comment about what is important for the next political cycle, at least from our perspective. And we have spoken about economic instruments, about education, about incentivizing, but also about mandates. But one thing which is also very important is to make the circular economy, and because we want to go from the fringes into the mainstream, it is to make circular economy a political topic, a political commitment which is shared by all the mainstream political forces or by all the political parties in our societies. And I think we have good omens in this respect because this spring, as you know, every spring the heads of states and governments of the European Union gather to discuss the economic perspectives of the political continent. And they have discussed this March about the the strategic priorities up to beyond 2030, and circularity is one of the 7 priorities that they have identified. But this needs to be, and because Mrs. Cavazzini has mentioned about differences between political parties in the European Parliament, and it's only natural to have these differences, but sometimes we have seen political differences getting very sharp in contrast to each other. So we need to work more in order to explain that why there is a necessity for circularity, and it's not just a vision that we are having, but we are responding to a real economic and societal need.
There's one question that is probably fitting there as well, because I mean, if we have all these also financial, like if it's so difficult to also finance all these things, how is the European Union also planning on taking this into consideration by talking about financial incentives? There was the question about tax reduction, subsidies, price premium for circular economy products.
What I find important to mention, there is the idea of financial incentives, but 2 more financial tools are much more powerful in my respect, and probably then you can answer to that. The Commission kind of committed also to make procurement criteria much more circular, but I don't see that. As we know, public procurement has a huge potential because it's 13% of the GDP, and if you already use this huge potential and all the state procurement basically says we only want recycled content or we want circular material, then it has a huge, especially in the construction area, a huge potential. But there, I have not seen any substantial proposals by the Commission, a little bit the Net Zero Industry Act, but okay. And secondly, what all companies tell me, but I don't know if you have other opinions on that here also in the audience, if prime material is cheaper than the recycled content, we never will use recycled content. And for example, in terms of, and then, of course, the question is not only about incentives, but also about making prime material more expensive.
Yeah, I totally...
Maybe just to get Elvin on board in this as well. Would this help you and the companies that are actually working with your certification as well?
Yeah, look, we need to, the whole incentive framework needs to change. I was just thinking about the discussion on returning products. Just last week I was talking to a company, I can't say who, obviously, who said, we produce 3,000 products using your certificate, or based with your certificate, and the certification includes a return channel. So we got 1 return in that period. Now, maybe some of that was the way in which that was set up within the company. Maybe it wasn't broadcast, but there also, I think there's a whole question of consumer habits and understanding and education. But there's also the incentive framework where I think the tax model, tax systems based on materials, not just labor, looking at local cycles, looking at the policies around waste, where waste is not seen as always a bad thing in the sense that everything is a resource for something else. And actually some of the national legislation around waste can actually be a prohibition around transnational companies that actually want to use waste as a resource rather than something simply to throw away. And of course, education. So I think there's so much that can be done to change the success of and to change the consumer habits around this. But I'm not sure that was answering the question there because I didn't fully understand it. But I wanted to say that anyway.
The question was like, if you what you would think if these ideas would also help organizations, companies to get your certification, if there would be more question also from the from the buying level.
From the buyer level?
Yes, like from the procurement, if you have a mandatory procurement.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, the more of that, the more we can use regulation to nudge habits to, especially business-to-business procurement, which is actually where we see a lot of success of recognition of rather specialized label in our case. So in terms of procurement rules, I mean, that's where actually we've seen a lot of growth, including in Germany. The more we can do that, I think that the better. I mean, in a sense, often something starts with regulation, then becomes habit, or sometimes the opposite. So I think, you know, generally, we need to see a lot more of that. And the problem is the pace at which this is moving is not being, you know, is unfortunately not matching the place of the emergency we're in. I mean, there's a real mismatch of time schedule here. That's the real problem.
There was also the question, because the institute was founded in the US, and if you could see, like, also the EPA in the United States was also a big fan of the cradle-to-cradle standard and was preferring it. Would you say that the collaboration of your work and the political level is better in the US than it is in the European Union?
No, I wouldn't say that actually. In fact, I see, partly because of your work, the connections in the EU as being particularly profound because there's just such a neat fit, right? Because the action plan just so well reflects the whole philosophy. And that's why the certification growth is so much stronger here. It's a challenge for a global standard to have such differences between major regions where we work, and especially with the EU, frankly, at such a so much higher level in so many respects. So we have great collaboration at the political level, but the differences in just the vocabulary and the mindset are quite stark right now. And for us, that's just a real challenge in navigating a global standard where we're working with multinational companies that are operating in all kinds of different markets. The good thing here is that because many of those companies need to operate in the European Union, it rises things rather than a race to the bottom, it's a race to the top because they need to implement REACH or whatever other regulation that is required to operate here. So that helps us. But when we're working with US only or South Asia only companies, we're facing this stark difference of regulation and consumer preferences. So it's not so much about the political engagement, it's about just where different societies are at right now in quite a fragmented world in terms of belief systems.
Okay, thank you very much. I think one point we have missed in this discussion yet is when we are talking about the circular economy, here we talked a lot about circularity and circular design. With Cradle to Cradle, we add one thing that's really important in our perspective, and that's the positive impact, like the perspective that we can do better and not only less bad. How would you say, and maybe we can close this round with this as well, how would you say is this idea of that we can have a society that is actually not only not harming the environment, but having a society that is actually helping the environment and also being front runners in innovation, in creativity, and in actually creating positive impact instead of less negative impact. Maybe Alvin, you like to start, and then we just...
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge I think we all face, in the sense that often the origins and the way in which the environmental movement can come across is to say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. There's a negative list of things, and actually that's really important when it comes to dangerous chemicals, but it comes across as a mindset of prohibition and restriction. So I think that the craft of the cradle-to-cradle philosophy is to recognize that something shouldn't happen, but actually the overall intent is a positive, better, more exciting product. So what we're trying to do is sort of thread that needle at the company level by having them go through this process of sort of a more fun, exciting way of thinking about design that is also aligns with a business model that still can function in today's economy and society. And that's a difficult task. So a sort of abstract way of answering that question, but I think that when I talk to companies that have gone through this process, there is a feeling that, yeah, it was tough. We had to change, and change is not always fun. But the products are more exciting and better, and the staff are happier about them at the end of that process, because we're all individuals as well as employees in these kind of organizations, and they want to see that positive message, not just we didn't do bad, but we're actually creating products that actually can do good.
Doing good, creating positive impact. How would you say these ideas are implemented in the idea of a circular economy in Europe?
I mean, probably I can ask you a question back. When you think about what we just discussed and presented, what we're doing on circular economy on EU level, what do you think is missing from a cradle-to-cradle perspective?
I mean, when we talk about what's missing, like these positive perspective, right now we are setting goals that are always in a reduction perspective. So we are setting a goal of 1.5 degree. That's like also reduction of, we are destroying this planet, or we are setting a goal of being climate neutral, but it's also not being climate positive or trying to implement ideas that we can actually be beneficial, and that it was good that we were here.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, we just have this next legislative cycle ahead of us. We have the European election ahead of us, and I think everyone, the Commission, but also parliamentarians, political parties, we are still also, you know, in a search mode. What can we do next? So I really, really recommend that you also look on how to operationalize your philosophical idea of a positive impact. And I'm sure a lot of stakeholders in Brussels are probably also happy to take it up. So it's just an invitation to you guys.
I take you by word. That's good.
For me, this is just the next frontier after. So I would say the frontier that we need to reach tomorrow is the mainstreaming of the generalization of circularity and sustainable business models, and the regenerative economy is the frontier after. First, I think, but maybe I'm a lawyer by training, and I'm looking maybe more squarely at things, but I think we need, and it's also an issue of political age. And now the focus of our societies is on offsetting our negative environmental footprint. Once we really do this, once we really become climate neutral, we need to ask ourselves, so how we can do what we can do. But I think the time is not that far away.
Thank you. I think for us, it's more the goal we need to set, because if we set the goal being neutral, it could be that we will never reach the goal being positive, because we didn't define the right goal. And we did a lot, for example, to create a lot of waste streams or producing things that actually are against these positive goal that we could have. So I think we need to hurry up with setting these positive goals, but I think a lot of people around here I think a lot of people in this room are really happy to help you with this as well, and to bring their ideas and their work into perspective as well. So yeah, we are happy that you're here. Thank you so much that we can get in this discussion, and thank you for your work for a circular economy in Europe.